The glow panels of Harrow Station flickered, as they always did, at the beginning of the gamma shift. Lyris Hale glanced up from her maintenance tablet, accustomed to the rhythmic dimming. After 2 months aboard the orbital research facility, she'd learned to read the station's pulse like a living organism. Every groan of metal, every whisper of the circulation system, they all spoke to her in a language few bothered to understand. "Maintenance Tech Hale," the stern voice echoed through her comm unit. "Report to Level 7, Section C. Environmental filtration malfunction." Lyris sighed, tucking a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. "Copy that. ETA 4 minutes." At 17, she was the youngest crew member aboard Harrow Station, which orbited the irradiated planet Maldris Fru. Most people her age were finishing their education on the core worlds, not repairing life support systems at the edge of Vorik Empire space. But the orphanage stipend had run out, and the Empire's Youth Employment Initiative had been her only option. Maintenance technician, the bottom rung of the station hierarchy. She gathered her tools, slinging the worn canvas bag over her shoulder. Level 7 housed the Biological Research Wing, the heart of Harrow Station's true purpose. The Vorak Empire's military dominance depended on its bioweapon programs, and the research conducted here was among its most classified. The turbolift hummed as it carried her down. When the doors slid open, she was greeted by the antiseptic chill that permeated all of Level 7. Security Chief Roan stood waiting, his perpetual scowl deeper than usual. "About time," he grunted, his hand resting on the stun baton at his hip. "Commander Varan doesn't like to be kept waiting." Lyris stiffened. Commander Eric Varan, the facility director, rarely concerned himself with routine maintenance issues. "Sir, I wasn't informed the commander—" "Just move!" Roan gestured down the corridor with his baton. They walked in silence past a series of laboratories. Through reinforced observation windows, Lyris glimpsed scientists in protective gear monitoring various containment chambers. Most held specimens she couldn't identify, writhing masses of tissue, bioluminescent fungi, crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. At the end of the corridor stood a sealed door marked Acquisition Chamber 9. Roan pressed his palm against the security scanner, and the door hissed open. The chamber beyond was massive, at least 3 times the size of the others she'd seen. In the center stood Commander Varan, his tall, rigid frame unmistakable even from behind. Beside him was Dr. Celine Marrow, the station's lead xenobiologist. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun as she gestured animatedly at a series of holographic readouts. "The environmental controls are malfunctioning," Commander Varan said without turning. "Fix them." Lyris approached cautiously. "Yes, sir. What specifically seems to be the—" The words died in her throat as she saw what lay beyond them. A containment field shimmered around what could only be described as a living shadow, nearly 3 meters long, with a sinuous, segmented body. The creature absorbed light rather than reflected it. Its carapace was a deep obsidian that seemed to shift and ripple even when the creature was still. 6 limbs ended in serrated appendages that looked capable of shearing through metal, and what appeared to be its head housed a cluster of sensory organs that pulsed with a faint, purple bioluminescence. "The obsidian whelk," Dr. Marrow said, noticing Lyris's stunned expression. "Captured yesterday from the northern hemisphere of Maldris Fur, the planet's only known apex predator to survive the radiation storms." Lyris swallowed hard. "It's beautiful." Commander Varan turned then, his cold eyes narrowing. "It's a weapon, Tech Hale. Or it will be, once we've conditioned it properly. Your job is to fix the environmental controls so that we can proceed with the conditioning trials." Lyris nodded, moving toward the control panel. "What's wrong with the current settings?" "The creature's vital signs are fluctuating beyond acceptable parameters," Dr. Marrow explained, pulling up a chart. "Temperature, humidity, air composition. Something is causing stress reactions that are interfering with our baseline measurements. Lyris began running diagnostics. As she worked, she couldn't help but observe the creature. Despite its fearsome appearance, there was something about its movements that seemed defensive. It wasn't lashing out or testing the containment field. It was curling inward, the bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically. "The atmospheric mix is off," she finally said. "The filtration system is pulling too much nitrogen and not enough carbon dioxide. The creature evolved on a planet with a denser atmosphere." "Fix it," Commander Varan ordered, "and calibrate the systems to maintain these parameters." He transferred a set of specifications to her tablet. Lyris frowned as she reviewed them. "Sir, these settings, they're designed to induce stress. The oxygen levels alone would—" "Are you questioning orders, Tech Hale?" Varan's voice dropped dangerously low. "No, sir," she said quickly. "Just confirming the parameters." "Good." He turned back to Dr. Marrow. "Begin the first conditioning trial as soon as the environment is stabilized. I want a progress report by Aero 800 tomorrow." As the commander left, Dr. Marrow approached Lyris. "The parameters are correct, Tech Hale. We need to establish a stress baseline before we begin the pain response conditioning." Lyris kept her eyes on her work. "Pain response?" "The Empire's standard method for biological asset training," Morrow explained. Her tone clinically detached. "Pain is a universal motivator. Even an alien nervous system can be conditioned to respond appropriately when the right incentives are applied." Lyris's hands stilled momentarily over the control panel. She thought of the orphanage on Nexus Prime, of the caretakers who believed that discipline required a firm hand. She still carried a thin scar along her collarbone from one particularly harsh lesson. "Understood, Doctor," she said quietly. As she finished the adjustments, she watched the creature's reaction. The moment the atmospheric composition began to shift to the specified parameters, the obsidian whelk's bioluminescent patterns flared bright purple, and it began to writhe, pressing itself against the far side of the containment field. It was suffering, and she had just made it worse. "Perfect," Dr. Marrow nodded, making notes on her tablet. "You're dismissed, Tech Hale." Lyris gathered her tools, unable to look at the creature again. As she left the acquisition chamber, she heard Marrow speaking into her comm unit. "Prep the Class 5 shock collar for fitting. We begin conditioning at 2200 hours." Back in her tiny quarters, Lyris couldn't sleep. The image of the obsidian whelk writhing in its containment field haunted her. She pulled up the station schematics on her tablet, examining the environmental control systems for Level 7. Every chamber's atmosphere was individually regulated, with readings logged hourly. Access required security clearance, but as a maintenance technician, Lyris had backdoor entry to most systems, not officially sanctioned, but necessary for emergency repairs. She hesitated for only a moment before tapping into the feed for Acquisition Chamber 9. The readings confirmed what she'd suspected. The creature was being systematically stressed through environmental manipulation. Temperature fluctuations, altered air composition, even subtle gravitational shifts, all designed to keep it in a constant state of discomfort. And that was before the conditioning had even begun. Lyris chewed her lip, considering her options. What she was contemplating would violate at least 3 station protocols. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the creature's desperate attempts to escape its invisible prison. With a deep breath, she began writing a subroutine. Nothing too obvious, just small adjustments to the environmental parameters during the midnight to 0400 shift, when most of the research staff would be off duty. She couldn't completely override the program settings without triggering alarms, but she could mitigate some of the creature's suffering. As she finished coding, a notification flashed on her tablet. Maintenance required, Level 7, Section C, Environmental Filtration Junction 12F. The system needed a physical component replaced, giving her legitimate access to the area near Acquisition Chamber 9. Lyris smiled grimly. Sometimes the station itself seemed to be on her side. When she arrived at level 7, the corridor was dimly lit for the night cycle. Only a skeleton crew of security personnel patrolled, and they barely glanced at her maintenance badge as she passed. Everyone was accustomed to seeing the lowest-ranking technician handling the grunt work during Gamma Shift. Junction 12F was located in a service tunnel that ran behind the acquisition chambers. As Lyris worked to replace the faulty component, she activated her subroutine with a few taps on her tablet. Immediately, she heard the soft hiss of the ventilation system adjusting. Curious to see the effect of her modifications, she moved along the service tunnel until she reached a small grate that opened into Acquisition Chamber 9. Through it, she could see the obsidian whelk in its containment field. The creature was still now, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing with a slower, more regular rhythm. As the atmosphere slowly shifted towards something closer to its home environment, its segmented body relaxed, unfurling from its defensive posture. For just a moment, the cluster of sensory organs that constituted its head turned toward the grate where Lyris watched. The purple light pulsed once, twice, in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Lyris held her breath. Could it sense her presence? Was it intelligent enough to recognize that something had changed? The moment passed, and the creature settled into what appeared to be a resting state. Lyris finished her work and left. But the image of that pulsing light stayed with her. It had felt like acknowledgement. The next day, Lyris was called back to level 7 for another malfunction. When she arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Security Chief Roan stood with Commander Varan and Dr. Marrow outside Acquisition Chamber 9, their faces grim. The first conditioning trial failed, Roan said without preamble. The shock collar had no effect. Lyris kept her expression neutral. What does that have to do with the environmental systems? Commander Varan fixed her with a cold stare. Dr. Marrow noticed anomalous readings in the atmospheric composition during the night cycle. Explain. Lyris's heart raced, but years in the orphanage had taught her to lie convincingly when necessary. The new filtration component I installed last night has a different calibration threshold than the previous model. I adjusted the baseline parameters to compensate, but the system probably overshot during the initial integration period. Dr. Marrow narrowed her eyes. And you didn't think to report this adjustment? It should have corrected itself automatically, Lyris said. I didn't realize it would affect the conditioning. Commander Varan seemed to accept this explanation, though his displeasure was evident. Fix it properly this time, and submit a full report on the calibration procedures. Yes, sir. As they walked into the chamber, Lyris saw the obsidian whelk. A metal collar now encircled what passed for its neck. But otherwise, it appeared unchanged. If anything, it seemed more alert, the bioluminescent patterns shifting with greater complexity than before. The Class 5 shock collar delivered stimuli at increasing intensities, Dr. Marrow explained, reviewing data on her tablet. The creature's nervous system registered the pain, but there was no behavioral response, no compliance, no conditioning effect at all. It just took it, Lyris asked, unable to hide her surprise. Precisely. Marrow sounded both frustrated and intrigued. Its pain threshold appears to be extraordinarily high, or its nervous system processes pain differently than we anticipated. Commander Varan's jaw tightened. The Vorak Empire has successfully conditioned species from 17 different worlds using pain response protocols. This creature will not be the exception. Prepare for sensory deprivation combined with chemical agonists for the next trial. As Lyris adjusted the environmental controls back to the stress-inducing parameters, she noticed the creature watching her. Its bioluminescence dimmed, and it slowly curled inward again as the atmosphere changed. She felt a pang of guilt, knowing she was contributing to its suffering. But what choice did she have? Directly disobeying orders would only get her removed from duty, or worse, charged with sabotage. And then, she would be unable to help the creature at all. Later that night, Lyris requested permission to perform a comprehensive system check on Level 7's environmental controls. With the conditioning trials showing unexpected results, her supervisor approved without question. The Empire valued efficiency above all else. If the environmental systems were compromising the research, they needed to be fixed. This time, Lyris was more careful with her adjustments. Rather than changing the overall atmospheric composition, she created localized variations within the chamber, a pocket of more comfortable conditions near where the creature tended to rest, while maintaining the expected stress readings at the monitoring sensors. She also brought something else, a small portion of her ration bar, tucked into her tool belt. It wasn't much, a bland protein composite that was standard fare for lower-ranking personnel, but it was better than nothing. When she reached the service grate, the obsidian whelk was already there, as if waiting. Its sensory cluster pulsed with that same deliberate rhythm she'd noticed before. "Hey there," she whispered, knowing her voice couldn't carry through the containment field. "Rough day, huh?" The creature's bioluminescence flickered in response. Carefully, Lyris opened a small maintenance hatch next to the grate. It was designed for inserting repair drones into the chamber when necessary. She broke off a piece of the ration bar and placed it in the drone compartment, then activated the release mechanism. The small door slid open inside the chamber, depositing the food on the floor just inside the containment field. The obsidian whelk didn't move at first. Its sensory cluster focused on Lyris rather than the offering. "It's okay," she said softly. "It's not much, but it's better than whatever they're giving you." Slowly, the creature extended one of its limbs toward the food. The appendage, which had looked so lethal before, now moved with surprising delicacy. It touched the ration piece, then drew it closer to its body. Lyris couldn't see anything resembling a mouth, but the food disappeared somewhere beneath the creature's obsidian carapace. After a moment, its bioluminescence shifted from purple to a warmer, almost amber hue. "You like that, huh?" Lyris smiled. "I'll bring more tomorrow if I can." As she prepared to leave, the creature moved closer to the grate, its body flowing with an almost liquid grace. It extended a limb again, this time pressing it against the inside of the grate where Lyris's hand rested on the outside. The gesture was so unexpected, so seemingly deliberate, that Lyris gasped. The creature held the position for several seconds, its bioluminescence pulsing steadily, before withdrawing and settling into its rest position. Lyris sat frozen, her heart pounding. That hadn't been random movement. That had been communication. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern emerged. Each day, the research team would attempt a new conditioning trial. Sensory deprivation, chemical agonists, even direct neural stimulation. Each day, the obsidian whelk would register the pain, but show no behavioral modification, no compliance with the commands being impressed upon it. And each night, Lyris would come to the service grate. She would adjust the environmental parameters, bring small offerings of food, and talk to the creature in soft, gentle tones. Gradually, she began to understand its bioluminescent patterns. Certain pulses meant recognition, others curiosity, still others something like contentment. She learned that it preferred darkness, but seemed fascinated by the small light on her tablet. It enjoyed the protein components of her ration bars, but rejected anything containing synthetic sweeteners. And most importantly, it was unquestionably intelligent, capable of not just recognizing patterns, but creating them. "You're not just an animal, are you?" she whispered one night, as the creature traced complex geometric shapes with its bioluminescence. "You understand what's happening here." The pattern shifted, forming a slow, deliberate sequence that Lyris had come to recognize as affirmation. "They're not going to stop," she said sadly. "The conditioning trials will just get worse until you either comply or—" She couldn't finish the thought. Failed biological assets were typically dissected for study, their components cataloged before disposal. The creature extended a limb toward her, pressing it against the grate in what had become their nightly ritual. But this time, the limb shifted, the tip morphing into a shape that roughly approximated a human hand. Lyris stared in astonishment. "You can change your shape?" The bioluminescence pulsed once, "Yes." "Why don't you show them? If they knew how intelligent you are." The light pattern shifted rapidly, forming a sequence Lyris hadn't seen before. She couldn't interpret it precisely, but the intensity conveyed urgency, perhaps warning. "You're hiding your abilities," she realized. "You're pretending to be less than you are." Another pulse of affirmation. "Smart," she murmured. "If they knew what you're capable of, they'd try even harder to weaponize you." Suddenly, the service tunnel was flooded with light. Lyris whirled around to find Security Chief Roan standing behind her, stun baton drawn. "Step away from the grate, tech hail," he ordered. Lyris rose slowly, hands raised. "Chief Roan, I was just performing maintenance on the—" "Save it," he gestured with the baton. "Commander Varan has been monitoring the environmental logs. Your adjustments haven't gone unnoticed." Fear coiled in Lyris's stomach as Roan escorted her to the command level. She was brought to Varan's office, where the commander sat reviewing data with Dr. Marrow. "Tech hail," Varan said without looking up. "Explain why you've been systematically countermanding the environmental parameters for Acquisition Chamber 9. Lyris stood at attention, mind racing. Denials would be pointless. They clearly had evidence. Her only hope was to frame her actions in a way that might appeal to their research interests. The stress parameters were interfering with the creature's baseline function. "Sir," she said, "I believe that by establishing periods of environmental stability, we might observe more nuanced responses to the conditioning stimuli." Dr. Marrow raised an eyebrow. "And you took it upon yourself to conduct this experiment without authorization because I observed patterns in the creature's bioluminescence that suggested higher cognitive function than your initial assessments indicated. This, at least, was the truth. I thought if I could establish a form of communication—" "Communication?" Commander Varan interrupted, finally looking up. "With an apex predator?" "Yes, sir." Lyris straightened her shoulders. "I believe the obsidian whelk is not just responding to stimuli, but interpreting them. Its failure to comply with the conditioning protocols isn't due to a high pain threshold. It's deliberate resistance." A heavy silence filled the office. Lyris could feel sweat beading at her hairline, but she maintained her stance, gaze fixed on a point just above Varan's head. Finally, Dr. Marrow spoke. "Commander, if what she's saying is true, it would explain the anomalous readings we've been getting during the trials. The creature's neurological responses don't match its behavioral outputs." Varan's expression remained skeptical. "You expect me to believe that a maintenance technician with no xenobiological training has made a breakthrough that our research team missed?" "Sometimes an outside perspective," Lyris began, but Varan cut her off. "What exactly have you been doing during these unauthorized visits? Tech hail." Lyris hesitated, then decided that partial honesty was her best option. "I've been adjusting the environmental parameters to match what I believe are the creature's native conditions. And I've been observing its responses. And feeding it," Roan added from his position by the door. "I found ration bar fragments in the maintenance hatch." Commander Varan's eyes narrowed. "You've been interfering with a critical Imperial research project, potentially compromising months of work, because you felt sorry for the test subject?" Put that way, her actions sounded naive at best, treasonous at worst. Lyris chose her next words carefully. "I believe there's a more effective approach to conditioning the creature. Sir, the pain response protocols aren't working because the obsidian whelk responds to different stimuli. If you'll allow me to demonstrate—" "Demonstrate," Varan laughed coldly. You're facing charges of sabotage. Tech hail. The only demonstration you'll be giving is to a military tribunal. Commander, Dr. Marrow interjected. While Tech Hale's methods were unquestionably inappropriate, her observations might have value. We've made little progress with standard protocols. Varan considered this, drumming his fingers on the desk. You're suggesting we reward insubordination because it might yield useful data. I'm suggesting we explore all avenues of research, Morrow replied carefully. The Empire expects results, not excuses for failure. It was the right approach. Nothing motivated Vorak command structure, like the fear of appearing inefficient to their superiors. After a long moment, Varan nodded curtly. Very well, Tech Hale. You will demonstrate your approach tomorrow at Oro 900 in the combat arena. If your methods show any promise, you'll be reassigned to Dr. Marrow's research team for the duration of this project. If not, you'll face the consequences of your actions. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As Security Chief Roan escorted her back to her quarters, now under lockdown, Lyris's mind raced. The combat arena was used for testing weaponized biological assets against automated defense systems. It was designed to evaluate combat effectiveness, not facilitate communication. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, what had she gotten the Obsidian Whelk into? That night, unable to sleep in her confined quarters, Lyris reviewed everything she'd learned about the creature, its bioluminescent patterns, its apparent intelligence, its ability to reshape its limbs, all pointed to a species far more sophisticated than the Empire had classified it. But how could she demonstrate that in a combat arena? The Obsidian Whelk had shown no aggression during their interactions. Would it even understand what was expected of it in such an environment? By morning, she had formulated a plan, a desperate one but the only option she could see. When Security Chief Roan came to escort her to the arena, she was ready. The combat arena occupied an entire section of Level 5, originally designed for training elite Vorak soldiers. It had been repurposed for biological weapons testing when Harrow Station shifted to research operations. Its walls were reinforced plasteel, its floor segmented into different terrain types that could be reconfigured as needed. Today, it was set up to simulate the irradiated wastelands of Maldris IV, rocky outcroppings, shallow acidic pools, and patches of the phosphorescent moss that constituted much of the planet's remaining vegetation. Commander Varan, Dr. Marrow, and several other research staff observed from a shielded gallery above. The Obsidian Whelk had already been transported to the arena, its containment field forming a shimmering dome in the center of the space. Tech Hale. Varan's voice echoed through the speakers. You have 15 minutes to demonstrate your alternative conditioning method. Security protocols remain in effect. If the creature displays aggressive behavior toward station personnel, it will be neutralized immediately. Lyris swallowed hard. Understood, sir. I'll need the containment field deactivated. A murmur ran through the observation gallery. That is not advisable, Dr. Marrow responded. The Obsidian Whelk has not been tested in an open environment. The containment field interferes with clear bioluminescent communication, Lyris argued. I can't demonstrate the full extent of our interaction otherwise. Commander Varan leaned forward. You claim to have established communication, yet you've never interacted with the creature outside its containment field. How can you be certain it won't attack you? Lyris looked directly at the Obsidian Whelk, whose sensory cluster was focused intently on her. Its bioluminescence pulsed in the pattern she recognized as recognition. Because it's had multiple opportunities to harm me through the maintenance hatch, and it never has, she said with more confidence than she felt. The creature understands cooperation. After a tense discussion among the observers, Varan finally relented. The containment field will be lowered incrementally. At the first sign of aggressive behavior, it will be reactivated at full strength. Proceed. Tech Hale. Lyris approached the shimmering dome slowly. As she drew near, the obsidian whelk moved to the edge of the field. Its bioluminescence, shifting through patterns she recognized as curiosity and caution. "Hey there," she said softly, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We've got an audience today." The containment field began to lower, dissipating from the top down like a receding tide. When it reached the height of the creature's sensory cluster, Lyris held her breath. The obsidian whelk remained perfectly still, its attention fixed on her. As the field continued to lower, it made no move to escape or attack. Finally, the field disappeared entirely, leaving nothing between Lyris and the alien predator. The silence in the arena was absolute. Lyris could feel the tension radiating from the observation gallery, knew that weapons were trained on both her and the creature, ready to fire at the slightest provocation. Slowly, deliberately, she removed a ration bar from her pocket. She broke off a piece and held it out on her palm. "Trust goes both ways," she said, loud enough for the observers to hear. The obsidian whelk extended a limb, its tip morphing into a more delicate appendage as it approached her hand. With careful precision, it took the offered food, drawing it back to its body. A collective gasp came from the gallery. The creature's shape-shifting ability had been undocumented until now. "Tech hail!" Dr. Marrow's voice came through the speakers, tight with excitement. "Can you direct the creature to perform a specific action?" Lyris nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. She and the obsidian whelk had established a form of communication, but they had never attempted anything like commands or instructions. "Let's try something simple," she said to both the observers and the creature. She pointed to one of the rocky outcroppings, several meters away. "Can you move to that position?" The obsidian whelk's bioluminescence pulsed in what Lyris had come to interpret as consideration. After a moment, it glided smoothly to the indicated rock, its segmented body flowing over the terrain with eerie grace. "Remarkable," Marrow murmured through the speakers. "No pain stimulus applied, yet it follows the directive." Varan was less impressed. "A simple movement is hardly evidence of effective conditioning for combat purposes. Tech hail. Can the creature distinguish between targets? Can it follow more complex instructions?" Before Lyris could respond, a panel in the arena wall slid open, and 3 combat drones emerged, spherical in shape, bristling with sensors and light weapons. They were standard training tools for biological assets. "These drones are programmed to emit mild, painful stimuli when they approach the creature," Varan explained. "The traditional conditioning protocol is to train the asset to attack specific drone types while avoiding others. Let's see if your communication can achieve similar results." Lyris's heart sank. This was exactly the scenario she'd hoped to avoid, forcing the obsidian whelk to demonstrate combat capabilities. But refusing now would only result in both of them being deemed failures. "I'll need to establish parameters," she said, thinking quickly. "Which drones should it engage? And which should it avoid?" "Engage the red-marked units. Avoid the blue," Varan instructed. "Standard protocol." The drones began to move, circling the arena in different patterns. 2 bore red markings on their chassis. 1 was marked with blue. Lyris turned to the obsidian whelk, which had moved closer to her as the drones appeared. Its bioluminescence had shifted to a pattern she hadn't seen before, rapid pulses that suggested alertness, perhaps alarm. "I know this isn't what we practiced," she said quietly, hoping the gallery microphones wouldn't pick up her words. "But we need to show them what you can do, or they'll go back to the pain protocols." The creature's sensory cluster focused on her, then on the drones. "The red ones," Lyris pointed. "Those are targets. The blue one should be left alone. Can you understand? The bioluminescence pulsed once, yes." "You don't have to hurt them," she added hastily. "Just disable them somehow. Show them you can tell the difference." For a moment, The obsidian whelk remained motionless. Then, with a burst of speed that left Lyris gasping, it launched itself across the arena. Its first target never stood a chance. The red-marked drone attempted to evade, but the creature's limbs extended, reshaping into sharp, whip-like appendages that wrapped around the drone and crushed its propulsion system. The drone dropped to the arena floor, disabled but intact. The second red drone fired a pain stimulus, a focused sonic pulse designed to induce neural distress. The obsidian whelk's carapace rippled, absorbing the impact without slowing. It caught the drone with two limbs, pinning it against a rock outcropping until its systems went dark. Throughout the engagement, the blue-marked drone circled nearby, even firing its own pain stimulus when the creature came close. But the obsidian whelk never engaged it, moving past it with deliberate control to focus on the red targets. When both red drones had been neutralized, the creature returned to Lyris's side, its bioluminescence now pulsing with a steady, calm rhythm. The silence from the observation gallery was deafening. Finally, Commander Varan spoke. It differentiated between targets without prior conditioning, and it disabled rather than destroyed the drones, showing restraint and tactical assessment. More importantly, Dr. Marrow added, it returned to Tech Hale after completing the task. That suggests not just compliance, but coordination. Lyris placed a hand on the smooth obsidian carapace beside her, feeling a gentle vibration beneath her palm, something like a purr, though she knew such an analogy was probably meaningless for an alien species. It understands cooperation, she said, looking up at the gallery. Not dominance, not pain response, but mutual benefit. Everything I've observed suggests the obsidian whelk comes from a social species, one that values collective action over individual aggression. A social apex predator? Marrow sounded skeptical, but intrigued. That would be unprecedented on a world like Maldrisfu. Perhaps our classification was incomplete, Lyris suggested. Maybe it's not just a predator, but something more complex. Commander Varan leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Tech Hale, instruct the creature to attack the blue drone. Lyris stiffened. Sir? If your communication theory is correct, and the creature is following your instructions rather than responding to conditioning, then it should attack the blue drone if you tell it to. Prove that this isn't simply a predator avoiding certain prey types based on instinct. It was a test, not of the obsidian whelk's capabilities, but of Lyris's control and her willingness to follow orders. If she refused, everything she'd achieved would be dismissed. She looked at the creature beside her, its bioluminescence now pulsing with what she interpreted as concern. It understood what was happening, she realized. It was waiting for her decision. Attack the blue drone, she said loudly, for the benefit of the gallery. Then, in a whisper, meant only for the creature. But don't hurt it. Just show them you understand. The obsidian whelk's sensory cluster focused on her intently. For a long moment, it didn't move. Then, with deliberate slowness, it turned toward the blue drone. The drone attempted to retreat, but the creature's movement was too swift. It caught the drone between two limbs, lifted it to its sensory cluster as if examining it, then set it gently back on the arena floor, undamaged. It then returned to Lyris's side and fixed its sensory cluster on the observation gallery, its bioluminescence pulsing in a pattern Lyris had never seen before. Complex, rhythmic, almost like language. What is it doing? Varan demanded. Lyris shook her head, equally bewildered. I'm not sure. This is new behavior. The creature's limbs began to reshape, elongating and thinning until they resembled slender tentacles. With precise movements, it used these appendages to manipulate its own bioluminescence, creating three-dimensional patterns in the air, geometric shapes, flowing lines, pulsing nodes of light connected by threads of purple energy. "It's communicating," Dr. Marrow breathed. "Not just with Tech Hale, but with us." The display continued for nearly a minute, growing more complex until it resembled a star chart or a neural network. Points of light interconnected in ways that suggested deliberate structure rather than random pattern. When the display finally faded, the obsidian whelk settled back into its standard form. Its sensory cluster remained fixed on the gallery, as if waiting for a response. In the stunned silence that followed, Lyris found her voice. "I think it just demonstrated that it's capable of far more than we assumed. This isn't just an apex predator. It's a sentient being." The implications hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. The Vorak Empire's biological weapons program operated under strict protocols regarding sentient species. Pain-based conditioning of genuinely sentient beings was classified as torture under imperial law, a convenient ethical boundary that rarely interfered with weapons development, as few captured species met the Empire's stringent criteria for sentience. But what they had just witnessed was impossible to dismiss. Commander Varan's voice, when it finally came through the speakers, was subdued. "Tech Hale, escort the subject back to Acquisition Chamber 9. Dr. Marrow, prepare a full report on today's demonstration. We need to reassess our approach to this project." As security personnel arrived to help transport the obsidian whelk, Lyris noticed that they maintained a respectful distance, their weapons lowered. The creature allowed itself to be guided back to its chamber without resistance, staying close to Lyris throughout the journey. Back in Acquisition Chamber 9, the containment field was reactivated, but the environmental parameters were adjusted to match those Lyris had been setting during her nighttime visits, comfortable rather than stressful. "Tech Hale," Dr. Marrow said as they finished the transfer. "I've recommended that you be assigned to my research team as an interspecies liaison. Your unconventional approach has yielded results that our standard protocols failed to achieve." Lyris blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Doctor. I'd be honored." Marrow nodded, her expression thoughtful as she gazed at the obsidian whelk. "The Empire will need to be informed of our findings. A sentient species changes everything about this project." "What will happen to it now?" Lyris asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "That will depend on how the Imperial Science Directorate classifies it," Marrow replied. "But I suspect our focus will shift from weaponization to communication. If this species possesses intelligence comparable to our own, there could be significant strategic advantages to establishing diplomatic relations, rather than merely exploiting their biological capabilities." It wasn't the answer Lyris had hoped for. The Empire's idea of diplomatic relations often involved subjugation rather than true partnership. But it was better than continued torture. As the days passed, Lyris's role evolved. Her official title became Chief Interspecies Liaison, a position created specifically for her unique ability to communicate with the obsidian whelk. The pain response conditioning equipment was removed from Acquisition Chamber 9, replaced with various communication tools and environmental enhancements designed to facilitate interaction. Dr. Marrow's research team made rapid progress in deciphering the creature's bioluminescent language. They discovered that it communicated through a complex system of light patterns, tactile sensations, and biochemical signals, a truly alien form of expression that challenged their understanding of language itself. They learned that the obsidian whelk was not, in fact, a solitary apex predator. Its species lived in deep underground communities on Maldris IV, emerging to the irradiated surface only when necessary for certain resources. The radiation storms that had rendered much of the planet uninhabitable to the Empire had been navigated by these beings for generations, their malleable bodies adapting to conditions that would kill most organic life forms. Most surprisingly, They discovered that the creature had a name, or at least a designation that translated roughly as Seeker of New Paths. It had volunteered to be captured, curious about the strange beings that had established an orbital presence above their world. It was studying us, Lyris realized during one of their communication sessions. While we were trying to study it, the bioluminescence pulsed in the pattern she now recognized as amusement. Commander Varan was less enthusiastic about these developments. The Empire had invested significant resources in the biological weapons program, and a diplomatic first contact scenario was far outside his area of expertise. But even he could not deny the potential value of establishing relations with a species that had mastered survival in one of the most hostile environments known to the Empire. 3 months after the combat arena demonstration, a delegation from the Imperial Science Directorate arrived at Harrow Station. Lyris, as Chief Interspecies Liaison, was tasked with facilitating the first official meeting between Imperial representatives and Seeker of New Paths. The meeting took place in a specially designed communication chamber, with Seeker now free of any containment field. The creature had grown noticeably since its arrival on the station, its obsidian carapace now shimmering with iridescent patterns that shifted with its moods and thoughts. As the Imperial delegates entered, Seeker's bioluminescence flared in greeting. Using a translation interface developed by Dr. Marrow's team, it communicated directly with the delegation. "Your people tried to train me with pain," its translated message stated, projected on screens around the chamber. "But I responded only to the kindness of this one." A limb extended toward Lyris, its tip morphing into the now familiar approximation of a human hand. The lead delegate, a stern woman with the insignia of the Imperial Diplomatic Corps, nodded thoughtfully. "Our methods were inappropriate. We lacked understanding of your nature." "Pain is a poor teacher," Seeker responded. "It creates fear, not cooperation. My people have known this for many cycles." "And what would your people seek from the Vorak Empire?" the delegate asked. "Why reveal yourselves now, after remaining hidden for so long?" Seeker's bioluminescence formed the complex star chart pattern it had displayed in the combat arena. "The storms grow worse. The world changes. We have adapted for many cycles, but adaptation has limits. We seek new paths, beyond our world, among the stars." "You want to leave Maldrisfor?" Commander Varan interjected, surprised. "Not all, but some. To learn, to grow, to find new environments, new challenges. Stagnation leads to extinction." The delegation exchanged glances. The Empire's expansion had always been driven by conquest and resource acquisition. The idea of a species voluntarily seeking integration, offering knowledge exchange rather than submission or resistance, was novel. "And what would you offer the Empire in return?" the lead delegate asked. Seeker's response was immediate. "Adaptation. Survival in environments you cannot tolerate. Knowledge of worlds you cannot explore. And understanding of life forms very different from your own." The negotiations continued for hours, with Lyris serving as the primary intermediary. By the end, a preliminary agreement had been reached. A small group of Seeker's people would be granted passage to an Imperial research world, where they would work alongside Vorak scientists in exchange for technological assistance with Maldrisfi's deteriorating environment. It wasn't perfect. The Empire's ulterior motives were transparent to anyone familiar with Imperial politics, but it was a beginning. A relationship built on mutual benefit rather than domination. As the delegation departed, Commander Varan approached Lyris and Seeker. "The Empire is revising its biological assets protocols," he said, his tone grudging but respectful. "Your case has prompted a re-evaluation of our approach to non-humanoid species." Lyris smiled. "You mean the Empire has realized that kindness might be more effective than cruelty?" Varan's expression remained stern, but there was a hint of something new in his eyes, perhaps uncertainty. perhaps growth. I mean that efficiency is the Empire's primary concern. If your methods yield better results than pain response conditioning, then adaptations must be made. It wasn't an admission of ethical error, but in the context of imperial doctrine, it was revolutionary. Later, alone with Seeker, in what was now called the communication chamber, Lyris reflected on how much had changed in the months since their first encounter. "You could have escaped at any time, couldn't you?" she asked. "With your abilities, the containment field probably wouldn't have held you for long." Seeker's bioluminescence pulsed with that familiar pattern of amusement. "Escape was possible, but understanding was necessary." "Understanding of us, the Empire?" "Understanding of connection." A limb extended, gently touching Lyris's hand. "In isolation, even adaptive species wither. In connection, even different forms find common purpose." Lyris thought about the orphanage on Nexus Prime, about the years she had spent learning to survive in a system that valued strength over compassion. She thought about how a simple act of kindness, adjusting environmental controls, sharing a ration bar, had changed not just her life, but potentially the relationship between two species. "They tried to train you with pain," she said softly, "but you responded only to kindness." Seeker's bioluminescence formed a new pattern, one Lyris recognized now as hope. "Pain teaches fear," the creature responded. "Kindness teaches trust, which builds stronger bonds." As they sat together in the dim light of the chamber, human and alien, their silhouettes merged into a single shadow against the wall. Different forms, common purpose. Beyond the viewport, the irradiated surface of Maldris IV glowed with the eerie beauty of a world transformed by hardship, while above it, the stars beckoned with the promise of new paths. In the vast expanse of the Empire, where power had always been measured by the ability to inflict suffering, a small revolution had begun, not with weapons or war, but with a maintenance technician who had chosen to be kind when protocol demanded cruelty. And perhaps that, more than any weapon or conquest, would prove to be the more lasting legacy.